Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Wade Graham's Dream Cities. I'll be talking a little bit about the author. I'll go into what the book is about, some things I liked about it, some things I didn't like about it, and I'll finish off with what I will be reading for next time. So Wade Graham is a writer based in Los Angeles. He's known for writing a lot about gentrification and architecture in Los Angeles. He was on the podcast There Goes the Neighborhood, which was produced by WNYC. Part of that podcast examined gentrification in Los Angeles, and he was called in almost as like a historian about how Los Angeles has changed over the years and kind of the history of the real estate market in that area. This book, Dream Cities, doesn't necessarily focus specifically on Los Angeles, though there are a lot of parts of it that mention or talk about Southern California. What this is, Dream Cities, is basically taking, I believe it's 7 different architectural ideas or designs that have arisen both in outside of the United States, but primarily in the U.S., and kind of shows from almost really the country's founding to now how these 7 different ideas, they're almost, the way he does it is as a chronological timeline, so they're almost different eras, how these things have manifested themselves in the cities that we live in, but also how they have led to other eras, almost like kind of a passing of the baton of the changing ways that we've thought about how we want to live together in cities, or we don't want to live together in cities, as the case may be. And he does this by kind of breaking it, having 1 or 2 different architects of each of these movements, gives a little bit about their history and background before kind of explaining how their ideas were made manifest or were not made manifest physically, but also how those ideas kind of passed down the ideological stream, as it were, of history. I really enjoyed this book a lot. He does a good job of making everything kind of seem of a piece, meaning you can kind of see the progression of these different ideas as we go from probably the country's founding almost to the way it is today and how we think about cities today. Just some really standout chapters. He has a chapter on Frank Lloyd Wright's idea for, and I had never heard of this, but his idea to basically make a city based around almost like a single lot home. And each person would have basically a lot, an acre, I think it's like an acre of land, and that would just be spread throughout the entire country. Each person would have this much land, and then we would all kind of transport ourselves through the use of automobiles. He kind of talks about why that maybe was not a practical idea, or why it was not even a good idea necessarily socially, and how that idea was kind of used against certain groups and things like that. Even though that idea itself never came to full fruition. He also talks about Jane Jacobs and her ideas in New York City during the 1960s. He doesn't go into a full deep dive analysis of her and Robert Moses and all those things that were going on, but he kind of explains using her passages in Death and Life of a City, or Death and Life of an American City, wherever her kind of seminal work is called, showing her ideas and how they would translate to physical space, which I thought was really interesting. And he also had some critiques of her that I thought was really interesting. And he kind of, that whole thing is something I never really knew about. And so I thought the way that he kind of did that for these different architectural movements, as someone who's kind of a layperson when it comes to this stuff, I thought was really easy and accessible. And kind of some of the later chapters, one of them is dealing kind of with malls and how retail shopping relates to just the movement of people and how that relates to cities. And then also there's a kind of final chapter called Techno-Habitats, which is basically the architectural movement he's identified since 1970 that's kind of the most significant, and kind of using, trying to find a balance between the man-made structure and the natural environment. I thought was really interesting. If I have a critique of this book, I think there were some chapters where he went a little long. I think the last 2 chapters, when he's talking about malls and Techno-Habitats, those 2, they seemed they seemed to kind of keep going and kind of lost steam for me for a little bit. that's really the only critique I have overall. I think he does a good job of explaining not only the main gist and ideas that these different architects had, but also the underbelly of a lot of them that they may or may not have seen at the time, but how those ideas were, if they weren't made manifest exactly the way that the architecture imagined them, a version of it was created that kind of hurt certain people or made things difficult for certain people. So that was Dream Cities. I really recommend it. If you are someone who has an interest in architecture but doesn't maybe know where to start, I thought this was a really accessible book to read. I think he does a good job of blending a lot of different things in terms of the history of the architect, kind of the way society was at the time this person existed, and kind of the main purpose and design philosophy for each of the architects. So I really enjoyed it. I really highly recommend it. Dream Cities by Wade Graham. And next time I will be reading Romeo and or Juliet by Ryan North. Until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Till next time, bye.